Welcome to another episode of Plain Talk here on Eagle Eye TV. I'm your host, Ken Ward, and today we're joined by Joe Siegelman, who's the Democratic candidate for Attorney General here in Alabama. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us.
Ken, thanks for having me.
Joe, can you first talk a little bit about yourself and why you decided to run for Attorney General this time?
So, I am a civil rights lawyer in Birmingham, originally from Montgomery, and the Attorney General's office is a really unique office. It's commonly referred to as the Chief Law Enforcement Officer, Chief Prosecutor. I like the definition of the People's Lawyer, but it's an office that's unique because it really should be a non-political, non-partisan office. The Attorney General doesn't make the law, can't change the law, and limited opportunities to interpret the law. And I'm not somebody who likes politics really at all, but this is an office that really should be insulated from that.
You currently serve, like you just said, as a lawyer in Birmingham. You're relatively young right now running for this position. Can you talk a little bit about why you decided to throw your hat in the ring this early in your career?
Well, and like I said, I'm not a fan of politics. This is not something that I ever aspired to do, and I don't look at this as entering politics because this office is something that really should have nothing to do with politics. But I am relatively young. I'm only 30 years old. We elected an Attorney General who was 28, so I've got a couple years on them.
That was Bill Baxley.
Bill Baxley, right, and who has been very supportive. And you know, something that he pointed out, and I firmly believe, is that when you're younger, you have an additional drive, an additional enthusiasm. We, if elected, will have an opportunity to bring our Attorney General's office into the 21st century, and I'm the best candidate positioned to do that. But I'm excited about bringing a younger, newer, fresher perspective to the Attorney General's office. I think that's needed too.
You're running as a Democrat in a state that right now all of the statewide offices except for Doug Jones right now are held by Republicans. Could you talk a little bit about how, if elected, you'd be able to work with some of the Republican counterparts, given that most likely there will still be a lot of Republicans also in the state government?
Well, sure, and I'm ready and willing to work with anyone. And this is an office where not only should it not matter, the letter D or R beside your name, but frankly, to do this job right, it can't matter. The Attorney General's job is to protect the people of Alabama and administer justice in this state. And you know, I've received a lot of support from Republicans. In fact, I had a Republican State Executive Committee member resigned from the State Executive Committee to endorse me for Attorney General over my Republican opponent. And I really think that there are a lot of people in this state who want an Attorney General who's independent, who's about people, not politics. And I look forward to hopefully having the opportunity to bring that to the Attorney General's office. And also, my #1 goal is for people to know there's a choice, that Alabama's destiny is not predetermined, in this office especially, and to ultimately have people vote for the person rather than the letter beside my name or my opponent's name.
You come from a pretty well-known political family over in Montgomery. Your father was the governor of Alabama and also served several other statewide elected positions as well during his tenure in politics. Could you talk a little bit about how you would, having grown up in that environment, bring that to the table if elected?
Sure. So I'm proud to be my father's son, my mother's son as well, and I grew up in a family that valued a commitment to the public good, and I gained an appreciation as I got older for what my dad chose to do with his life, but I also always knew that there were other ways to serve. And as a private attorney, a civil rights attorney, I get to represent individuals, represent people, families, and I never thought that I would be seeking elected office. And one of the reasons for that was, you know, I made the decision pretty early on, growing up in a political family, that I just didn't like politics. And to me, it's only gotten worse, and I firmly believe that we've just got to have independence in this office to do the job right. We just have so many problems, whether it's the opioid epidemic, whether it's human trafficking, which is a bigger deal in this state than a lot of people realize, whether it's our overcrowded prison system. In many cases, we're warehousing individuals with drug addiction and mental illness. We just have too many problems. None of them are partisan problems, and the Attorney General can have a meaningful impact. And that's where I want to step in. I want to bring my passion and commitment to people, to serving them, and I think with that attitude and mindset, we can do a whole lot of good in the Attorney General's office.
Over the past few years, the Attorney General's office, mainly starting with Attorney General Luther Strange, who ended up becoming senator and now is a private citizen right now, his office really started prosecuting a lot of public corruption cases. Matt Hart kind of leads that unit and prosecuted most notably former Speaker of the House and former Auburn area Representative Mike Hubbard. Could you talk a little bit about how you would address public corruption here in this state, and if you would continue some of those efforts or build upon them or change them in any way?
So absolutely, and unfortunately for the people of Alabama, especially, frankly, younger people in Alabama, corruption continues to be a problem and plague the state of Alabama. It hurts our reputation. It makes it more difficult to bring quality jobs in Alabama because corporations or companies are reluctant to associate their brand with Alabama and its reputation. We have seen in less than 3 years, the highest office holder in every branch of Alabama government be removed from office either for unethical or illegal conduct. And something that is tremendously concerning in this race is my opponent actually chairs the Ethics Reform Committee, yet my opponent is currently under an ethics investigation right now himself for taking $750,000 from this out-of-state dark money group, contributions that actually violate Alabama campaign finance law, and that's troubling on a number of levels. One is, if your job as Attorney General is to apply the law fairly, equally, and impartially to every Alabamian, it of course starts with yourself. And the Attorney General, my opponent, has clearly violated these laws, and normally it would be the Attorney General to prosecute them. And so to have someone in office now who's currently under investigation himself does not instill much confidence in the people of Alabama and our ability to fight public corruption when the Attorney General himself is compromised in that regard. So, I look forward to offering a clean slate, a fresh start, younger perspective as well, and to really try to get us back on track in that office.
All right, we're going to need to take a quick break. You're watching Plain Talk here on Eagle Eye TV. We're joined by Democratic candidate for Attorney General here in Alabama, Joe Siegelman. We'll be right back.
This is a place where it only takes a second to imagine your future. Grasp a new concept in class. Inspire a child's curiosity. Discover a real-world solution. Seize an unexpected opportunity.
There goes Davis!
This is where you gain the preparation, confidence, and determination to succeed. This is Auburn.
So, I'm kind of new here, but I've noticed a trend. My human does this funny thing where she goes around and gets all my toys, and then she hides them in that basket by the door. It's like, hello? That's where you put it last time. You were the worst at hide and go seek.
Welcome back to Plain Talk here on Eagle Eye TV. I'm your host, Ken Ward, and today we're joined by Joe Siegelman, who is the Democratic nominee for Attorney General here in Alabama. Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us.
Absolutely.
We were talking a little bit earlier about some of the public corruption issues in the state. Could you also talk about some of the other things that you might work on fighting in the state if you were elected Attorney General? You had mentioned drug trafficking and opioid issues and things of that nature.
Yes. So my number one goal is to make the office independent and about people, not politics, and to restore people's faith and confidence in knowing that their government is working for them. A lot of people ask me, you know, what's the number one problem or the first thing that you hope to work on or need to work on as Attorney General? It's hard to think that there is a bigger problem Alabama faces right now than the opioid problem. It's something that continues to get worse and worse. We learned recently that Alabama has suffered an increase in overdose deaths. We have more pills per person in Alabama than in any other state. We have 4 counties in Alabama that are currently at risk of an HIV outbreak in 2018 directly attributed to this crisis. And they could give you other statistics that are troubling. And it's something we've got to take seriously. In fact, Alabama is currently in litigation against one of the companies, is an out-of-state massive pharmaceutical company that had a central role in misleading the people of Alabama as well as the country as to the addictiveness and dangerousness of these pills. Again, my opponent has, through this dark money out-of-state group, accepted a lot of money in the tens of thousands of dollars from this pharmaceutical company that Alabama's supposed to be litigating against. And something I've run into on the campaign trail far too often is people wondering and having a suspicion that the decisions that are made aren't made for them and their families and for the students in Alabama, but are made for some personal or political agenda. And it's troubling to have to ask that question, and in a situation like the opioid epidemic that requires such urgency and such resources, to have to wonder whether you have an Attorney General who is working for you or perhaps working for an out-of-state pharmaceutical company is a question we just can't afford to ask. And we've got to get to work. There were Attorneys General who filed cases 15 years ago, and we've only just recently filed ours. There's a coalition of 41 Attorneys General from other states. Alabama did join this coalition, but it may not surprise you. We were last. We were 41st to join, even though we have one of the worst, if not the worst, problems of anywhere in the country. And so we could go through any number of issues. The opioid problem is a very serious one. It's going to require a lot of work. And I want to make sure we're in a position where we never have to wonder not just whether our Attorney General is working for the people of the state, but all of our office holders.
One of the big issues that the Attorney Generals, the past few ones, have worked on is gambling in this state. It's been a very controversial issue in this state. A lot of our viewers might know about Victory Lane, which is about 20 miles from here, has been raided several times, along with some in Greene County and some in Lowndes County as well. Could you talk a little bit about how, if elected, how your office would work on electronic bingo issues in the state, and what kind of philosophy you would take in that regard?
Sure. Well, gambling has been a central issue in the state for quite some time. There have been millions of dollars spent litigating this issue and on task forces. And to be honest with you, we haven't really moved the needle one way or the other. The Supreme Court has ruled twice on this issue, and to me, it's something that has mostly been settled. And to be honest with you, when family and friends are dying every day because of a problem like the opioid epidemic, you know, that's where our focus has got to be. It's got to be on protecting the people of Alabama, keeping our families safe, keeping students safe on campus, and I don't see that as a big problem moving forward in the state of Alabama.
So I take it that you would not take the same approach that Luther Strange and administration most recently took in regards to raiding some of these facilities or prosecuting some of these owners and things of that nature.
Well, I'll tell you, law enforcement is not a partisan job. And like I said, the most important thing that I want to do to change in this office is make it independent. There will be laws that need to be enforced, and whether they seem to be the right thing for Alabama or not, that's the way it is. And if I wasn't okay with that, then I wouldn't be seeking this office. But a lot of that enforcement can be done on the local level. Doesn't necessarily need to be done by the Attorney General's office. We will take those issues seriously and follow the law and enforce the law as it's written and as it exists in the state of Alabama. But like I said, we're going to have to prioritize, where our resources are going. And like I said, protecting the people of Alabama, making sure students can attend classes, without being in fear of their safety, and keeping family and friends from dying because of a huge problem we're facing. That's where my focus and attention is going to be.
You mentioned working with local officials. Each Alabama citizen is also represented by a local district attorney. How would your office work in partnership with them in regards to some of these initiatives you've been talking about in regards to crime and things of that nature?
Well, I'll tell you, the Attorney General can only do that job as well as first responders do theirs. And first responders work with local officials, district attorney's office, to ensure that the law is followed and that we keep people safe in our communities. And I welcome any and every opportunity to work with district attorneys. If they're facing a situation where they don't have the resources to prosecute a big case, I look forward to working with them and providing them the resources that they need on those cases. And something else, I'm very humbled and proud to have the endorsement of the Fraternal Order of Police, Lodge 1. It's the largest lodge in the state of Alabama, and actually the majority of the Fraternal Order of Police membership in the state is in that lodge. The state professional firefighters have endorsed me, and it's a good feeling to know that they recognize the importance of this office and have chosen me as the person they believe best capable to serve them and ensure that we have the resources to keep Alabamians safe.
Your opponent and current Attorney General Steve Marshall has talked a lot about his relationship with the Trump administration. He's visited the White House several times and done some testimony over there and on some panels and things like that. In addition to that, he's joined in some lawsuits that kind of favor some of the policies of the Trump administration, including one on the United States Census in regards to illegal immigrants and how they're counted as part of that. Could you talk a little bit about how a potential Siegelman administration would work with the Trump administration and how it would interact with some of these other state lawsuits that are going on right now on some of these big key issues?
Sure, yeah. So the Attorney General's job does not change depending on who's president, and it just doesn't. And you mentioned these out-of-state cases that my opponent has involved the state of Alabama in, whether he initiated lawsuits or joined lawsuits. In each of those cases, there are tax dollars and resources being spent out of state, used out of states, that in many cases don't affect Alabamians at all, and in some cases actually can make Alabamians significantly worse off. And something that I want to do is I want to make sure that every Alabamian knows that the decisions that are made in my administration as Attorney General are made solely because of the merit and because it's what's best for the people of Alabama. And when we see these lawsuits being filed and our resources being sent out of state without a clear understanding of why that's happening, and at the same time, you know that the Attorney General, my opponent, has taken $750,000 from out-of-state dark money groups. And the reason why they violate Alabama campaign finance law is because you don't know who's giving this money. And so we're left having to ask the question, did my opponent, did our Attorney General involve the state of Alabama in these lawsuits because that's what's best for us and our families? Or did he do it because of this $750,000 from these unknown out-of-state sources? And so my goal is to eliminate the need for the people of Alabama to have to ask that question, for them to know they have an Attorney General who's working for them each and every day, and that every decision, whether it's involvement in any sort of out-of-state lawsuit or anything that we're doing in-state, that every decision is made because of the merit and because it's what's best for the people of Alabama. And I look forward to working with anybody who shares those motives and those goals with me. And that could be the president, that could be the governor, it could be any official. I just want to work for the people of Alabama and make sure that our resources are being used for them and to make their lives better.
You'd mentioned that some of those out-of-state lawsuits might have adverse effects on Alabama citizens. Could you point to some specific examples that you could think of about that?
Sure. So the one, probably the most notable one is one in Texas, where it actually puts at risk the health care of nearly 900,000 Alabamians with pre-existing conditions. And why we would put our resources into a lawsuit that could strip the health care of so many Alabamians, making them worse off, making their families worse off. And in Alabama, we have a strained health care system. We're seeing rural hospitals struggle to keep the doors open, and we would add further strain on those institutions by taking away the health care of so many Alabamians. That just doesn't make sense to me. And that is a prime example of where we're left having to ask the question of, why was this decision made? We know it's going to hurt hundreds of thousands of Alabamians with pre-existing conditions. So why is he doing it? And you're left wondering, is it the $750,000 from out-of-state sources he's accepted from this dark money group? Is it some personal or political motivation? And it's just really unfortunate that we're left having to ask those questions.
Alabama, many of Alabama's major cities have very high violent crime rates. Birmingham, Montgomery, Mobile have all kind of experienced some of these high crime rates. Could you talk a little bit about how your office, I know some of these crimes are directly prosecuted by the local district attorneys, but can you talk a little bit about how your office could possibly work with them if you were elected?
Absolutely, and that's a good question. So I have had a number of conversations with district attorneys all across the state, and they share this concern, and this is a very serious issue. We saw this past summer a violent offender paroled out of prison only to commit a triple homicide, including a grandmother or great-grandmother and her 7-year-old grandson, brutally murdered. And I mentioned before that in Alabama, there's unfortunately in many cases, too many cases, we're warehousing individuals with drug addiction and mental illness. We need to make sure that we use diversion programs, drug courts, for example, mental health courts, to allow these individuals, whenever possible, to avoid the criminal justice system so that they don't have to go in prison to further an overcrowding problem and also become associated with hardened violent offenders who are serving. And also at the same time, make sure that those who are dangerous to our communities, violent offenders that don't need to be released, that we have a system where we have room for them in our prisons. And so this is a complicated problem, and it's absolutely one where the Attorney General will need to collaborate with local officials, especially district attorneys. But the first thing we've got to do, we can't have incarceration as the default option. We have some amazing diversion programs, drug courts. I've talked to judges who run these programs who sometimes have success rates upwards of 85, even 90%. We need to use those. We need to make them more robust. And when we have a prison system where for every 3 people who are released, 2 go back, when 90% or so of the people who are currently in prison will be released at some point, we owe it to ourselves to make sure that those individuals can be productive and contributing citizens in our communities, because when we do that, it's not just helping them and their families, it helps all of us, because that way we reduce the likelihood of them reoffending, meaning commit another crime and going back into a prison system where our tax dollars have to pay for that. And so I look forward to changing the mindset and actually working with these officials, as you said, to really try to do something about this.
Many citizens in the state really value gun rights, and having the Second Amendment is a big priority for thousands, if not millions, of Alabama citizens. The Democratic Party nationally doesn't always get the best vibe in regards to gun rights, and many times conservatives will criticize them. Could you talk about how you would what your views on the Second Amendment are as a Democrat running in Alabama?
Sure. Yes. So one thing that I'm trying to do is let people get to know Joe, right? And at the end of the day, I want I want people to vote for the person and not for the letter beside my name or my opponent's name. You know, vote for the best person for the job. I grew up hunting here in Alabama, and I own guns, and I went hunting with my father, and I still enjoy doing that. And I think that there's a misconception that if you may be a Democrat, you don't hunt or like guns. And I've gone to, I'm not only a member, but have gone to like National Wild Turkey Federation events, and so I think that there's a disconnect there, and certainly something that I would like to change, but I can't do anything about what people think about the National Party. What I can do is let people get to know Joe. I'll tell you this, one of the reasons why the vast majority, and essentially I have universal law enforcement support, is my opponent has committed to repealing the concealed weapons permitting requirement, which is something that sheriffs universally want and law enforcement universally wants, because it helps them do their job and it keeps communities safe. And in fact, in Alabama, that is the only mechanism where we can do background checks. And so that is actually, I'm glad you asked that question, because that is a clear distinction between my opponent and me. When law enforcement says they need a tool to keep our community safe, I'm going to listen to that. And my opponent hasn't.
And then my final question is, we've talked a little bit about this throughout the interview, but my final question is, how are you over the next few days planning to differ yourself from the current Attorney General, Steve Marshall, and what is kind of your argument to Alabamians as to why they should elect you versus keeping Attorney General Marshall?
My goal is for people to get to know Joe, and the only way that I know for people to get a sense of who I am and what I care about is to get in front of them and to let them sense that I'm genuine, that I'm authentic, that I want to know the issues that matter to them and how the Attorney General's office can make their lives better. And we talked a little bit in this interview about this $750,000 that my opponent has accepted that actually really sadly and disappointingly violates Alabama law, and that the Attorney General himself is usually the person to do something about it. I don't want this campaign to be about what my opponent's done wrong. I want it to be about what I can do right. And the number one change we've got to make, to be able to address all these issues, to put our resources to work, to actually make the lives of the people of Alabama better, is we've got to start by making the office independent and about people, not politics. And I'm excited to hopefully have the opportunity to do that. And would love to have all of your viewer support because I want everybody's voice to be heard come November 6th. And I'll add this, if there's anything we didn't cover or there are other issues and people want to learn more about my campaign, my website's votejoe2018.com, votejoe2018.com. And would welcome any further questions from your viewers and the Auburn University students, and would certainly love to have anybody who wanted to get involved in the campaign. It's not too late.
Thank you so much, Joe, for joining us, and thank you for joining us as well here on Plain Talk on Eagle Eye TV. Follow us on eagleeyeauburn.com for all the latest election news and updates. Thank you so much for joining us, and War Eagle.